There we go. We are doing Parshat Chukat. This week is Chukat Balak, but I'm going to focus on Chukat. June 26, 2023. Thank you for coming. It's our last class of the season, so thank you all for being present during the previous classes. And just it's been a great joy. Let's get started. We are going to do, I think, one of the critical stories in the Torah, really one of the game-changing stories. It's a very short story, only 13 verses, but it is so critical, so pivotal in the story, and so pivotal in the life of Moses. You wonder why it doesn't get more play. Of course, the commentaries really do not stop in terms of trying to understand the story. And I'm referring to Moses smiting the rock. When Moses, I'm going to turn to the text right now, and we'll see how this story plays itself out. Okay, so we have to put something in context. The context is we've had the spies episode, we've had the Korach episode from last week, and we understand this text, this passage, to be in the 40th year of the sojourn. The entry into the land is about to take place. Following this story, they'll have their encounters with Moab, Ammon, and Sichon, and Og, and all the other kinds of obstacles to get into the land. But this is a turning point for Moses' life, because it's from this point on that Moses is denied access to the land. Moses is punished. Moses and Aaron will be punished for this episode. He smites the rock. So the text says as follows, and as usual, I like to put it very large so you can see it, and also to really focus on every single block. I want to do this like a Zapruder. I want to do this in a frame-by-frame analysis, because we may be able to discern some details from this analysis, and on the other hand, I'm not sure I'm going to resolve any questions. The main question which is the punishment that God metes out on Moses too much for what he did? And more precisely, what did he do? What was the sin that Moses committed here? And is it possible that we are seeing something or not seeing something? So here, Vayavo, they came. Vayavo, they came, the children of Israel, the entire community. Kol ha'edah. I'm going to point to this word edah a little later. Edah there are two words for congregation or community, edah and kahal. Whether or not they're really different, I think is a subject to question. I'm going to propose that there are subtle differences to those two words. So Bnei Israel, kol ha'edah, midbar tzin, they come to the wilderness of Tzin, b'chodesh harishon, in the first month. It doesn't tell us what year, but my assumption is that we're talking about the last year. Vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh, the people stayed in Kadesh. V'tamat sham Miriam, v'tikaver sham. So we have the report that Miriam, Moses' sister, dies, and she is buried there. Okay. So that doesn't elicit much comment at all from the text, and leaves way open for conjecture. The fact that the consecutive story of there was no water for the community leads the Midrash to produce this beautiful connection that Miriam was responsible for the water. Be'er b'zchut Miriam, there was a magical cistern of water that accompanied Israel throughout its journey in the desert. And that was because of Miriam. And Miriam rescued Moses from water, and we could embellish it even more. So when Miriam dies, there's no water. So the rabbis connect Vatamad Velohayamai. There was no water for the Edah, Vayikahalu, so they assembled al Moshe ve'al Aaron. And so here the text uses kahal, and it's very hard not to hear in kahal, the word kahal, notwithstanding its modern uses, some kind of conspiracy. Kahal seems to be overladen with the notion that we're grouping up to do something maybe unsavory. So there was no water for the community. Vayikalu, they became an assembly, a mob. They mobbed themselves against Moses and Aaron. And we've had mobs in the past. And so you can imagine that, they're used to this, but on the other hand, there's always a degree of fear. Vayarev ha'am im Moshe, the people quarreled with Moses. They don't get violent, but they quarrel. Vayomru lemor, they said, saying, Velu gavanu bigvachenu lifnei Adonai. Now would that we had expired when our brothers expired before the presence of God, which is an astonishing statement. Okay, these people evidently are the new generation, the generation that has emerged within the 40 years. Everybody else is dead. And so what they're saying then is this place is a place of death. And it's better for us to have perished, to die, expire, in the death of our brothers before God. And that is only exacerbated by the fact, by a sharp contrast that we have at the end of the Torah. It's fresh in my mind because in my daily study, I'm at the chapters 29, 30, 31 of Deuteronomy, and I've just read again the whole passage Uvacharta v'chayim, and choose life, which is, Moses's punchline is, the ultimate statement after the whole journey, which is, I set before you life and death, choose life. And so here it's clear that the people want to choose death. And so, you have this moment as the moment that is antithetical to the entire thrust of the Torah, the entire, I guess we could say, the overarching theme of the Torah is life. And here, this group of people, it wants basically to say, death. They want our life is not worth living, and therefore it's better for us to die since we're going to die anyway. Okay. Now their claim: Lama havetem et kahal Adonai. Why did you bring? They use the word kahal Adonai, the assembly of God, into this wilderness. Lamut sham. Anachnu v'irenu, the place where you think you were going to give us life, right? With the Torah, with everything, and lead us into the land. This is a place of death. Velama, second question. He'elitunu, you led us up mimitzrayim from Egypt. Lavi otanu ela makom hara hazeh, to this evil place. La makom zera, not a place of seeds. Utena v'gefen v'rimon, of figs and vines and pomegranates. Umayim ayin lishtot, and there's no water to drink. You brought us into a desolate place. You've promised us a good land, but what we have here is nothing. All we're eating is manna, and there's no water. There's barely any water. There's no water. There's no lushness to this territory. It's desolate, right? This is not the promised land. This is the forsaken land. So Moshe and Aaron, Vayavo Moshe ve'Aaron mipnei hakahal. They came away from the presence of the community, of the assembly, right? So it's interesting that they're able to turn away. The people make a demonstration in front of them, and ostensibly they're able to lash out at Moses with words and not lash out to Moses violently. And that of course might become a theme here. I just kind of hold that out. They're lashing out at Moses because maybe they're aware that, that there's been a lot of violence and a lot of death. Korach, as an episode before, was thrown into the underground. Their fire came out, and they know not to mess with Moses and Aaron in any kind of violent way, but they're still lashing out at them with words. Moses and Aaron turn, and they go to the entrance of the tent of appointment, and they flung themselves on their faces. Vayar kavod Adonai alehem, and the glory of God was seen by them. Now, I'm always somewhat critical of this expression, "Vayiplu al pneihem," they fall on their faces. I take a much more I don't want to say cynical view, but I guess it is, that it's an exasperation expression. On the other hand, the tradition, the commentaries, see this more as a supplication, that they're doing this not out of exasperation, but of a sincere desire to seek God's solace and presence here. And let's just say then it's possible that the ambiguity of the text can lead to both interpretations. It's the sense, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do with these people? And that expression is exasperation. Vayiplu al pneihem, falling on the face, may be just, they're beside themselves. But it also, if it's interpreted in a way of exasperation, it means that they have no resolution. Okay, I like the interpretation that they're trying to examine themselves in this as what did they do wrong? Maybe they've done something wrong. That may be charitable to them, but I think the realistic interpretation is they're at their wits' end with these people, and they fling themselves on their faces. Vayira kavod Adonai alehem, the glory of God was seen by them, meaning that there's a moment of compassion, God's compassion. God is present to them in the sense that God, by being present to them, is enabling them to have the strength and the perseverance in order to manage the crisis that exists now. And so, Vayidaber Adonai al Moshe lemor, God speaks to Moses and says as follows: Kach et hamatem, take the staff, va'akhel et ha'edah, and assemble the community. This is lovely, the two words. Ata va'aharon achicha, you and Aaron your brother. V'dibartem el hasela le'enehem, you are to speak to the rock, the boulder, before their eyes. V'natan memav, so that it gives forth its water. V'otzeta lehem mayim min hasela, thus you are to bring them out water from the boulder. V'ishkita, that you may give drink to the assembly, v'et biram, to their cattle. Okay, so we're gonna analyze this very carefully. But here's the command, basically, or the instruction. They've fallen on their face, and I read this in a kind of softer tone, which is a gentler tone. Go ahead, get up, take your staff, take the staff, gather the people, you and your brother, and speak to the rock in front of them. And the rock, you'll see, the rock will give its water, and you'll be able to water the people and their flocks and their cattle, right? It almost seems so simple to do that Moses would stand there and talk to a rock, okay? And basically, it doesn't say here what they are to say to the rock. You are to speak to the rock, and it doesn't anticipate that there may be some kind of difficulty with that, and we'll discuss that in a second. So what happens? Moshe vayikach Moshe et hamateh. He takes the staff from before the presence of God, milifnei Adonai, kasher tzivau, as God had commanded him. Vayakilu, Moses and Aaron assembled the assembly, et hakahal, el pnei hasala, that facing the boulder. Vayomer lahem, he said to them, Shimuna hamorim. Here, you rebels. Hamin hasela hazeh notzi lachem mayim. Are we going to take water out of this boulder? Which is an astonishing statement. Vayarem Moshe et yado. Moses raised his hand. Vayach et hasela. He strikes the boulder. Bimatehu, with his staff. Paramaim, twice. Vayitzu, so that abundant water came out. Maim rabim. Vateshtaida, the community, uveiram, and the cattle drank. Vayomer Adonai Moshe, God said to Moses, Ve'el Aaron, Yan lo emantim bi, because you did not have trust in me, la'aktisheni, to treat me as holy, or another translation, to affirm my sanctity, le'enei b'nei Israel, before the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore, lachen lo taviu et hakahal hazeh el haaretz asher natati lahem. Therefore, the two of you shall not bring the assembly into the land that I am giving them. Hemamei Meriva asher ravu b'nei Israel et Adonai vayikadesh bam. Those were the waters of Meriva, where the children of Israel quarreled with God, and he was made holy through them, or through which he affirmed his sanctity. And that is the story. And it's, characteristic of the story, its terseness, its compact nature of telling. There's no extra words there. What it does, it leaves to the imagination all the other elements, and this is, I guess, as a classic story, classic in the sense that it does what Torah does best, which is it invites the listener, the reader, to fill in all of the pieces and to ask the questions that we are meant to ask here. Most importantly, I guess, are the questions: what did he do? And did he deserve this? And was he wrong? And what may have happened here? And is it possible to read between the lines, or to see, the story in a different way? So I'm going to just stop here and get your reactions, and just see if in the preliminary reading, the first reading of this, we have some direction from you as readers, as listeners here. What do you think happened here? What's your, I guess it would be your first response, your first reaction, or your preliminary. Go ahead.
Well, in the first place, I think Moses was very angry at the people, and notwithstanding what God said, he was still angry and he couldn't help himself. He was angry at their complaints, and he expressed his anger by striking the rock. And the second thing is, he said, shall we bring the water out? And I suppose God would have preferred if he said, God is bringing the water, and God was angry that Moses took credit for something that he should not have taken credit for.
Okay, so we have the anger and the credit thing going on. Stanley, what do you have?
Well, it just adds to what John was saying here, really. It's one thing to hit the boulder where you can imagine that the water comes
the chicken from frying
through natural means. That is, he does something to dislodge the boulder and the water comes out, versus speaking to the boulder where
Right.
it's clear that this is supernatural, namely coming from God. So in that sense, he's not honoring God in the way that God wanted. God has a big ego and he doesn't want Moses to be taking the credit. He wants the people, seriously though, to understand this was by virtue of God's grace, so to speak, and not Moses's action in hitting the rock.
Sure.
And therefore God punished him. Well, question is whether it's too severe. Yes, but that's what happened. That's my view, and a view I think somewhere of the rabbis.
No, of course, and I mean, both of those are compelling, and I have to say, and I think I sense them, in both of you, which is I'm not satisfied. It seems to me that there's got to be something more, and honestly, I'm not sure I could provide a satisfactory answer here, other than the things that I'm going to show you in a second, that I think attempt to answer along the lines that both of you have already suggested, which is that this must have been such a critical moment, both of the unbridled expression of anger and also the sense of out and out, I don't know, rebellion, rejection of God's power, and I think also a deep sense of frustration. This, one of the classic interpretations in the Midrash basically says as follows: it's when you have, I'll never forget this. I learned this lesson as a Rosh Hashanah at camp. Okay, this is many years ago, and this is why I credit camp as the greatest training ground. So one time, the director asked me to do something, and I disagreed with her. I disagreed with her in front of people, and it was a very bad moment. And I knew I had done something wrong. And then, of course, as part of the training, she pulled me aside and said, "Listen, it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay to disagree with you, but let's take our disagreements privately and not publicly, because if we are disagreeing in public, it destabilizes." I don't think she used these words, but this is how I understand it now. It destabilizes the whole way that people see our interaction, and we need to understand that when we lead people, we have to be together, because the minute that there's friction between us, it sows division, and it sows the kind of conflict within everybody. It's unsettling. It's deeply unsettling, and I think we have seen this many times. See this constantly in Israel, where Israel kind of thrives. The political life in Israel thrives on public disagreement with but at the highest echelons, when you have ministers disagreeing with each other in public and tweeting at each other, it's so completely destabilizing. and it throws people off, and it makes for such a precarious kind of existence when your leadership is not together. You always feel that at some point it's going to tell the fragility of it, and that's not good. That's not good for anybody. So you have this moment where you have a public spat between Moses and God in some way. That seems to be, one of the explanations here. That's a classic explanation. Okay, also. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, so this may or may not connect with what you're saying, and it's certainly not original with me, but I'm juxtaposing Miriam's death with the fact that there seems to be no grieving going on.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the people get upset is not a gigantic surprise right then and there, because how are they grieving Miriam's death? How are Moses and Aaron grieving? And one of the commentators that I had read made the comment that Moses' use of the word "you rebels"
Hamorim
was actually not in character with him or Aaron as a peacemaker, and in a sense that causes a dispute within the community as well. And so to what degree does the punishment really relate to this inability to control anger? And I think Pirkei Avot speaks to the fact that anger takes you out of the world in certain ways too. So for me, one of the interpretations is less on the striking of the rock, but the inappropriate use of speech or the lack of use of speech. And I could come back to something else later, but that's one of my comments on this.
Well, I would go back to go back to the death and burial, and the fact that with regard to Miriam's death, it doesn't really talk about the people's reaction. We will see, in this week's Parasha also, where Aaron dies, and the people do mourn. The people mourn Moses. The people, we've had other deaths in the Bible in Torah up until now, where people mourn, and so the lack of the report on that, which leads to, I think, a plausible interpretation, which is they don't get the chance to mourn. And when you don't get the chance to mourn, when you don't go through the normal experience of that, something does, begin to brew up in you. I like to go back to the passing of Queen Elizabeth. Well, that was an extraordinary moment, extraordinary world historical moment. And of course, there were days and days of public mourning and grieving because the country needed to do that. And it was, filled with, the burial was filled with lots of lush pomp and ceremony, all of which remind us how important these kinds of symbols and rituals are in such a momentous event. It's not lost on any of us that when we experience death, loss in our own lives, we do gravitate to ritual, I think, in a very, very strong way, in order to construct a certain order out of the chaos in our lives at that moment. Judaism does this particularly well, with the insistence on, burial as soon as possible, and a kind of structure for mourning afterwards, with the Shiva, which is a structuring time, and a whole series. Of course, I don't want to anachronize, that to the Bible here, but striking in its absence is any kind of outlet. They didn't cry, they didn't mourn, they didn't say anything. You don't have a word on her other than, okay, so she died and there's no water. So maybe it is that they don't have the luxury to mourn. I remember studying this passage while I was reading some testimonies of survivors, and one of the things that comes up in survivor testimony is that, with death all around them, they're not able to mourn because they just don't have the wherewithal, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, to say, and this is the word, indulge in those experiences, because they're more concerned about what they're going to drink and what they're going to eat that moment than the death that they've experienced. They often feel so crushed by what is going on, the indescribable and unimaginable circumstances, that they have to delay their mourning, or they can't even muster the wherewithal to mourn. So a charitable reading of this is that they are not able to mourn because there's no water, because they're thirsty, and because which psychologist is it that has Maslow, right? The hierarchy of needs, right? So your first needs are what? Nourishment and security, basically. On the very lowest levels of human needs, they don't have their needs being met, and how would you even expect them to move beyond that? And so that, as the complicating initial factor, that they're in the desert, and that they're not being taken care of, and that leads to tremendous. They're tremendously unsettled, and Moses is having to confront, and it's Moses and Aaron have to confront their own loss at this point, but they also have to confront, a wild and unruly mob. Yet, as I mentioned, they're not so wild and so unruly that they're going to kill them. They're not. We don't. At least I'm playing that down. I don't see the violence there. I see the violence in the words and not in their actions. They're not about to stone them. That Moses and Aaron and another, when the spies come out, the spies Joshua and Caleb say, no, we can go, and the people want to stone them. The people, are bent on of violence there. Okay. Any other comments before we go forward? Okay, let me take it further. Okay, so what I want to do is compare. On the right side is the text from what God said to Moses, and on the left column it's what Moses did. It's basically, the consecutive verses. So the first says, Kach et hamatem. God said, take your staff. So it says, Vayikach Moshe et hamateh. Nice, simple. Milifnei Adonai kasher tzivahu. So those two words mean he takes the staff from before God as he was commanded. Okay, so again, I'm doing a frame by frame analysis, which is that he has to go somewhere. He has to go and get it. So I said, this seems to be a one-to-one correspondence. God asked Moses to take the staff, and Moses takes the staff. Simple. The text adds a piece of information, though, from before God. So where was the staff located? In Milgram's commentary, he says as follows: it was more likely the rod of Moses, which had been employed in the performance of God's miracles in the wilderness. And more relevantly, it was used in a previous instance of drawing water from a rock. And back in Exodus, we recall there's another episode where the staff is used, and the staff is actually the thing that hits the rock, in which it was identified as the one used to strike the Nile. Okay, so now I have a layer of complexity to the story that I didn't have before. I'll stop there. That the fact that Moses, I'm going to play out by frame here. God says, take the staff, and Moses has, he's, when the people congregate against him, he doesn't have the staff on it. We're so, influenced by the pictures that we've seen in art or movies. We think that he's always walking around with a staff, but the staff is not with him at this time. The staff is in the sanctuary. Okay, they left the staff in the sanctuary. Now there's Moses' staff, which is the magic staff, as it were, and there's Aaron's staff, which, if you recall, at the end of last week's Parsha, when the authority was being tested, all of the tribal leaders basically planted their staffs in the ground, and Aaron's staff becomes verdant. It blossoms with flowers and becomes almonds. It becomes an almond staff. It's a extraordinary, magical, or miraculous moment, and that's Aaron's staff. So there's a debate among commentators: which staff do they take? Do they take the Aaron staff that proves their authority, or they take Moses' staff that was used for all of the miracles or the plagues at the sea, okay, or back in Egypt? In other words, I'm reaching for my super instrument, my super item, or my super weapon, as it were. The staff has all of these properties to it, and notwithstanding the fact that the Torah has a sustained polemic against magic, we're in very difficult territory here in terms of what could or could not be magical. Okay, I'm going to put that aside for a second. So what Moses does is he goes into the sanctuary and he takes the staff. Okay, I'm going to go back to my text here with my comments. The text, so Ibn Ezra said the references to the rod of God. It was the rod which was placed before the testimony. So we have to imagine that in the sanctuary there are a number of items. It's a reliquary. We have the ark, we have manna, we also have a staff. Okay, and later on we're going to have a text as well. And the reference back to Exodus, Vayikach Moshe et Matei Elohim biyado, Moses took the staff of God. So Moses had a staff. The staff was put aside, and he retrieves it. And the staff that was left in the sanctuary of the previous story. So God said on the right-hand column, V'hakel et ha'eda ata v'aron achicha. And so what did they do? Vayakilu Moshe v'aron et ha'kahal. They assembled the kahal. They assembled the people. How they did it doesn't tell us. So it could in fact be that they just had heralds, or they summoned everybody and said, come to the main square in front of the sanctuary. Okay, you and Aaron, your brother, Atav Aaron Achicha. My close reading is it's Moshe v'Aaron, but they leave out Achicha here. That may or may not be significant. I'm sensitive to wherever it refers to the brotherly bond, and so maybe in this moment when they gather, Moshe and Aaron, they gather the people. The brotherliness is absent from them when they're gathering. I'm not sure if I'm doing too close a reading. And I asked the question I asked before, which is there a difference between Eda and Hakahal? Eda comes from Ed, which is also a flock, but it's also witnesses. And we had before, V'lo haya mayim la'eda. And so we have a kind of overtone here that they're like a flock of sheep. They need their water, like sheep would need water. Vayikalu, but they congregate, and that has the sense of they're demonstrating against. Okay, there was no water for the community, and they ganged up on Moses. They themselves refer to themselves as Kahal Hashem. And according to some scholars, Kahal has an original meaning of reproof. So it's very hard to hear all the nuances in language, but I'm trying to understand the difference between Eda and Kahal, and the only thing I have to offer here is that in a cognate language, in Arabic, you have Kahala, which is to rebuke, and so that may give us a sense that there's more than meets the eye to this word Kahal, that Kahal conveys within it critique, and also conspiracy. So God said to them, "V'dibartem elasela," speak to the rock, le'einehem, before their eyes. And so back to Moses. Moses is Moshe and Aaron took the congregation and they went before the rock. God wants them to talk to the rock before their eyes. Moses and Aaron gather the people to be right before the rock. Okay, so there's staging going on here. And does Moses know what he's going to do? Has he made up his mind at this point that he's going to talk to the rock or not? So the text, when you see what God said to them, God said, "Speak to the rock," and in front of them. Okay, so Moses gathers the people in front of the rock, and the fact that the text leaves out the talking, certainly, and before their eyes, leads me to say there's a moment in this story where Moses is thinking, what? God, I don't understand. I don't, he wants me to talk to the rock. He wants me to talk to the rock. What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to say to the rock? I don't understand this. What is going on here? And so this is the moment where the snap takes place in the relationship. It's the moment of fracture, which is the sense that it should be self-evident what you would say. It should be self-evident what you would do, which is, listen to me. I said to you to talk. So even if you read the alphabet, even if you said blah, 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 even if you close your eyes and meditate something, but using words, you can effectuate a miracle, okay? So use words to effectuate a miracle, right? You could even say, let water come out of this rock. But you get the sense, I get the sense, at least when reading this, how awkward it would feel, even if you're Moses, to stand in front of a rock and say, let this rock produce water. And then wonder if it's going to happen. Okay? So on the one hand, God told you to do that, but you can think like Moses, I can say that, but I know that's, I know enough about physics and nature that it might not happen that way. And if it doesn't happen that way, well, forgive me, I'm finished. I'm screwed. I'm sorry, right? This is the worst. Okay, and so I mean, I look at the empty space here and go like, what could have been going through his mind? So has he made up his mind at this point that he's going to talk to the rock? What does he think about talking to the rock anyway? Why would he? Since the last time something like this, God told him to strike the rock. If we go back to Exodus, I'm standing with you. Proceed before the people, take some of the elders with you and your staff with you, and strike the Nile, take in your hand. Here, God is saying, I stand before you on the rock at Chorev. You are to strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and people shall drink. Moshe did this before the eyes of the elders. Simple. You want water from a rock, you take the thing, you smack it, and you get water. Okay. I as an exercise, and I'm not going to show you. I tried to look at some videos of groundwater. Okay, and it's very interesting. There are sandstone where water seeps in sand, and if you just adjust it or manipulate it, so you'll get water. Many of us drive on, let's say, I-87 or through rock cuts. Okay, one of the great thrills is there's a trail in the Hudson, in the Harlem Valley, a Harlem Valley Rail Trail. We're near Camp Ramah, a bicycle trail, and it used to be a railway. And evidently, when they constructed the railway, they had to go through a very small rock formation, and it's beautiful. But they basically chiseled through or dynamited their way through the rock layers when they built the railway. Now it's a bike trail, and after or in a dry spell, or even after a rain, you can see the water is seeping between layers of the rock. Okay, our geological formations are layers. We have a geologist in shul, Bob Metz, so I'd ask him, all the different kinds of layers, and water can't go through rock, but water will go where there's no rock and where there are crevices. And so, it's easy to imagine that all you need to do to get a spring is to take a hammer or to take a blunt object like a staff, smack it, dislodge a rock, and you'll get a gush of water. Okay, and even for a person like me who if you walk in the desert, you're highly attuned to sources of water. I had the experience of a couple of years ago. We went to the Ramon Crater, beautiful place in Israel, and the guide was showing us, you can see where water is. Where's water? Water's where, if there's all of a sudden there's some, a plant or a tree, a cypress tree or another kind of tree, a Bedouin will know where to find water, okay? And so all you need to do basically is take your spade and you'll find a little bit of groundwater. So Moses, let's imagine that Moses knows the desert a little bit and knows where to find water and knows that this rock, is near a deposit of water, and says, look, I'm going to speak to it. I'm going to speak to it. It's ridiculous. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to take the staff because God told me to take the staff in the first place, 40 years ago. So that's what I do. Vayomer lahem, instead of talking to the rock, he talks to the people. Instead of talking to the rock, he rebukes the people. Shimona Hamorim, listen, please. It's kind of ironic. Shimuna, right? Which is hearken, listen, please listen, you rebels. Hamin, depending on how you intone it. Would from this rock we bring out for you water. I just translated it, word by word. But Hamin asela hazeh. Are we going to bring water out for you from this rock? So now I say that there are at least three ways to understand this question. One referring to us, one referring to the rock, and one referring to you. Okay? So could it be like this? Is it a question about the rock or a question about Moses, or ours a question about you, the people? Are we going to make water part of the stupid rock? Or are we actually going to do this in the way that God has said? Are we the ones that God has entrusted with performing this miracle for the rock? Or you rebels, do you deserve this miracle now that we are about to perform? And are we actually going to do this for you? So I think it's possible to kind of, depending on how you intone this question, to get three radically different interpretations here. What? Stupid rock? Or who are we? Or what? For you, you lousy people, you don't deserve this, So how much spite, how much, I mean, the sentence has, it's a trifold of anger and irony and sarcasm and vituperative, venomous, okay? It's a terrible thing to say. Now, Mayarem Moshe et Yado. Moses lifts his hand. So I ask a very stupid question, which is, which hand? Okay? So, you have in your imagination, at least I do, that it's the hand that holds the staff, because he's holding a staff with his hand. But wait a minute. I have two hands. What if I raise my hand without the staff? And then it says, I'm just going to skip down here for a second. And he smites it with the rock. He smites it with his staff. He raises his hand, and then he takes boom. Okay, or you could say it's this and boom. Okay, so I think there's a difference here, and it's actually significant. You may have seen it, and as I zip through it. So look at the war with Amalek. Vaya kasher yarim Moshe et yado v'gavar Yisrael v'kasher yaniach yado v'gavar Amalek. It was Moses raised his hand that Israel prevailed, but when he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. Could the raising of his hand here be a signal of invoking God's power? If so, let's play it out frame by frame. Moses raised his hand, the hand without the staff, to invoke God's power, to produce water, or to signal God's power over the people, to prevail over them. But when his arms are raised, he smites the rock with his staff. So it's almost a fake, boom, I want power. Like I did this gesture when you fought Amalek, okay? We prevailed. Hamin, Hamzela, Zenotzi lachem mayim. Okay, and the people are going to see that Moses, by raising his hand, is invoking divine power. And then immediately he takes up the next hand, boom, and he smites the rock with his staff. Not once, but twice. And that I want to say, that's what tells you that there's something more here. The fact that he does it twice. I mean, Mela, we can understand once, okay? You're frustrated once, but boom, boom. That signifies he's out of control. He's out of control. And of course, lots of water comes out, as it should have, due to natural reasons. He dislodged the rock that was blocking the ground flow, and the people drank, etc. So God said, after speaking to the rock will give its water, and you will have drawn from them the water from the rock. And sorry, the typos here. And the water, and you will walk the people in the herds. Yeah, and so that's what God said, but that's not what happened. What happened was he smacked the rock, and the water came out. All right. So I want to provide two interpretations here. I'm going to close this and get these up here. They're fascinating discussions. We don't have a lot of time for them, but we will do this anyway. All right. So this is Richard Elliott Friedman. I'm going to share it in a second. Richard Elliott Friedman, who I really enjoy studying from. He has a book called The Hidden Face of God. Okay. Shall we bring water from the rock? It's not just talk. Ultimately, Moses crosses a boundary that no human before him had crossed. He alters a miracle. This occurs in the episode of the water from the rock, possibly one of the most famous yet underappreciated stories in the Bible. It is the account of the great sin of Moses, the event that results in his death and his never setting foot in the land of Israel. The story that people complain because once again they are without water in the wilderness. God instructs Moses to speak to a rock and water will come out. Moses, with his brother Aaron, has his orders, but he changes them. Perhaps out of anger, he says to the people, listen, rebels, shall we bring water from this rock for you? He strikes the rock with the staff and the water comes out. God's response is to declare that Moses and Aaron have failed to sanctify God in the people's eyes, and their penalty is that they will not live to bring the people to the land. Aaron and Moses will die in the wilderness. In the touching last scene of the 5 books of Moses, Moses will come close enough to see the promised land. He will beg his God for a pardon. God will refuse, and Moses will die within sight of the land. People have argued through the centuries over what exactly the sin of Moses is. Is it that he hits the rock instead of speaking to it? Is it that he says, shall we bring water out of the rock instead of shall God bring water out of the rock? Really, both of these are related. By his actions, the striking, and by his words, he has boldly, publicly, and tragically stepped over the line. Until now, he has said, it is God, not I, doing these things. But now he has done the opposite. He has directed the people's attention to himself instead of to their God. Moses stepping over the line is so remarkable, so dramatic, that one couldn't miss a point in the episode that is in fact a turning point in the Bible story. Even though Moses strikes the rock instead of speaking to it, the miracle still works. The water comes out. Admittedly, Moses suffers a horrible punishment for this. It is arguably the worst thing that could be done to Moses, as he will now never set foot in the promised land. But the severity of the punishment communicates how serious the thing is that he has done. Moses changed a miracle. Is it that the deity has made the miracle work anyway, so as not to humiliate Moses? Or has Moses really acquired the power himself? The text does not say. All we know is that a human's direction of a miracle has reached a new height, and it will go higher. So what he's saying here is that you look in the context of the whole story of the Bible, this is a turning point, because God's power has now been replaced by a human being's power, and that, in a way, it's not a desecration of God, but it diminishes God in the presence. And so the diminishment of God in the presence of the community is what results in this. And yet we're left with the ambiguous reaction of whether or not it was Moses or whether it was God himself. I want to just quickly go to Zornberg, because she, as usual, has a totally different take, and it's really quite fascinating. And here it is. Okay, let's get this to the all right. Okay. Moses' words as blunt. Let me just try and make this a little larger for you to watch with. Moses' life with words comes to its crisis when God commands him, take the staff, gather the community, you and your brother Aaron, and speak to the rock before their eyes so that it gives forth its water, and you shall bring forth for them water from the rock and give the community that and their cattle to drink. The time is toward the end of the 40-year journey. The people are again bitterly complaining that no water to drink. God's instructions are ambiguous. Moses to take the staff, but speak to the rock. This is different from the previous narrative of water from the rock 38 years earlier, when he had been told unequivocally to strike the rock in order to produce water. The shock effect of the later narrative is delayed to the end. After Moses twice strikes the rock, water issues forth vigorously, and the people drink. It is then that God unexpectedly turns to Moses and decrees that he will not enter the land, because you did not trust me to sanctify me before the eyes of the Israelites. Therefore, you shall not bring this community into the land that I have given them. Astonishingly, God's anger is turned not against the people for their complaint, but against Moses and Aaron. What is their failure? On the face of it, Moses has succeeded. Water is issued forth from the rock, and the people have quenched their thirst. But God brings a strange viewpoint to the action. This is a failure, he says, in speaking before the eyes of the people. There was a dramatic visual power to be revealed in the act of speaking to the rock. This would have deepened the people's trust in God. You have failed to create trust by sanctifying me before their eyes. What God wanted of Moses was subtly expressed in his command, not simply that water should issue forth, but that Moses should bring it forth, elicit it from the hard rock for them, that in tenderness and care for his people, he should touch them by touching the rock with his words, rather than by exercising the brutal power of his staff. In a classic reading, Rashi comments on the story, if you had spoken to the rock and it had produced water, I should have been sanctified before the eyes of the community. They would have said, if this rock, which does not speak or hear and has no need for sustenance, fulfills God's word, how much more should we? The purpose of speaking rather than striking was to elicit from the people a kind of projective identification with the rock. Demonstrating the power of God's word on an insensible rock would have shocked them into a meditation on their own hearts. they would have become aware of the vulnerability of human flesh as compared to stony rock, to the heart's impressionability to the touch of God's word. Before their eyes, a transformation would have taken place, rock to water, which would have engaged their own fantasies of inner transformation. Eyes and heart are connected. Seeing in this way would have evoked a tactile experience of a primal order. When Moses strikes the rock, the opportunity for a more dynamic image is lost. One midrash puts it in developmental terms. When a child is small, his teacher hits him and educates him. But when he grows up, he corrects him with words. So God said to Moses, when this rock was young, you struck it as, oh boy. As it said, you shall strike the rock, you shall speak to the rock, recite over the Torah. Okay, the people are mature now, and I'm sorry that I didn't get maybe I have that on the next page. Sorry. Okay, the people are more mature now. A new generation can be handled in subtler ways. A chapter of Torah will affect them more deeply than the crude impact of a stick. Now their stony heart is capable of softening into flesh. Other commentaries take this dichotomy of the word and the blow to a more sensitive place. It is not Moses' use of the staff that is the problem. It is his use of words. It is his words of anger to the people. Listen now, you rebels, shall we produce for you water from the rock? He is striking the people with his words, wielding words as blunt weapons. This is the reading of Ha'amik Davar. Anger drives Moses off course, as it has before. What was wanted of him was a soft use of words. His use of sacred words would have touched and transformed them. Touching them, it would have taken them to another place. All language, Emerson writes, is vehicular and transitive, and is good as ferries and horses are for conveyance, not as farms and houses for homestead. Language can lead me thither where I would be. The faith or trust, emunah, that Moses has sadly failed to elicit from them is an experience of being drawn after God by his word alone. Maharal offers this description of the experience of emunah, being drawn by language. One knows joy and freedom. Again, we notice the tactile kinetic imagery. The human heart is an embodied heart, susceptible to touch and motion. One has the sense that God is not judging Moses for a one-time failure. His life of leadership has been characterized by a certain hardness in his relation to people. While he passionately advocates for them to God, he often speaks to them with a kind of repressed anger. So God bless her. She kind of hits it on the nail. Hits the nail on the head. She evokes an uncomfortable truth about Moses, that he's not the kind of guy you want to sit down and have a beer with. Moses is a great leader. There's greatness about Moses, but there's weakness to him. And we've seen this time and time again. And this may be, of course, a theme in her biography of Moses. Starting at the beginning, Moses, he acts violently towards the Egyptian taskmaster, as we might understand him. We might defend that violence in the sense, he's protecting. He's trying to prevent the Egyptian taskmaster from smiting his Israelite brethren. But I'm often, when I think about that story, I think, I've watched any amount of brawls on the ice in the NHL, and the referees, they don't go slugging away at the combatants, at the aggressors. The referees, they just push them away, and if it gets really heated, they'll hold them down. But God forbid the ref, who punches out a player. I mean, that's the end of your ref career for sure, right? But the point is, they're refs, they're referees. Their job is to separate people and to kind of say, cool it down, you're going 5 minutes in the box. You know, Moses doesn't do that. Moses, you know, takes whatever he has, either his fist or his elbow or a rock, and he kills the guy. And that ought to tell us right away that we're dealing with someone who has a lot of deep repressed anger here. And then in other places, and of course, you know, at the greatest moments of his life, he's able to capitalize on that anger for strong effect. He smites he throws down the tablets, and he's able to do what he needs to do there. But we get the sense that he pays a huge price for that, and the price is that he's just not the beloved leader, as he will become in later rabbinic lore. He is, of course, Rabbeinu. He's not Rabbeinu. He's the ultimate leader for the people. Go ahead, John.
Well, I think the story says when he strikes the Egyptian, he looks first around to see if maybe someone else can do it. He's not totally irrational. I mean, he's thinking.
Well, so the interpretation there could be he looks this way and that way, and he sees that there's nobody to witness him, nobody to witness him, right? Because he wants to really take a blow at this guy. Yes. Okay.
And the other thing, I love Zornberg.
Yes.
But she did say the people who are more mature. I don't know that the text supports that statement.
Well, so that's an interesting query for her. You know, she sees the 40 years, and here again, you know, perhaps I would say that the fact that the people don't resort to violent behavior here, they're complaining, but it's a town hall complaint. It's not a rabble-rousing complaint. I mean, look, you know, I'll make the analogy to the demonstrations going on in Israel. What has been remarkable over the last 22 weeks is that in terms of violence, these protests have not erupted in anything nearly related to things like resembling France or any other places. I mean, can you imagine 22 sustained weeks in America without violence? I mean, that's unheard of here. There would be crackdowns from police and riots and people, getting trial. Lots and lots of different examples of that. At any rate, so there may be it's a different people. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to channel some Jonathan Rabbi Sachs and the Baal Shem Tov, if I might.
Yes.
In that, as a turning point, this is the journey from, as you've said, to the journey to, in this transition, and particularly the Baal Shem Tov. And I really like his discussion about Bamidbar having the 42 stages of spiritual development in each of the different stops. And that spiritual development is not just for the people, but probably also for Moses and Aaron as well. And so what Zornberg is also saying is that he didn't successfully deal with a spiritual test. And if one of the metaphors of water being Torah that I've read about being there, by not using the words appropriately in certain ways, or in this regard, even with the red heifer, trying to understand why I should or shouldn't do it, he should just do what Hashem was saying in terms of this. And so it seems to me that the other piece, and I would defer to our psychology colleagues, the family therapist Jay Haley, I think, once said that a mother carries a baby in her womb. We carry a child in our arms when they're infants. We hold their hands as we go across the street. And as you get older, you end up carrying someone or holding them through your values and your words. So in this regard, Moses, in fact, maybe didn't cross physically into the promised land, but spiritually he did, in fact, by learning. So I don't necessarily see this as the absolutely horrendous punishment that it's often portrayed to be. I see this as a way of his continuing, and it's a punishment, but it's also not so much a punishment. One last thing I heard a Hasidic rabbi recently do this incredible analysis of the war with Sichon and Og later, and
Yeah.
saying that Sihon was with Cheshbon, which is it's calculation, and it's sort of dealing with the sins of the mind. And in the case of Og, which I guess I forget the Hebrew word where they were at, but it's the arm, it's action. And so the last two things that were dealt with were the Averus of the mind and the Averus of action that they were dealing with before going into the promised land. So it's all consistent with the Baal Shem Tov's discussion of spiritual development. And then you can connect it to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with Douglas Adams with the number 42, although he's not Jewish. But what is the magic of 42? Anyways, some random thoughts.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, folks. Go ahead, Sally.
Well, I know, and I know we're out of time, but I just want to say how much I appreciate the comments that people have made here, John, Robert, and others, and yourself. What you bring to this is really marvelous, including the commentators that you bring in.
Sure.
And I have to say, Aviva Zornberg, her name was Aviva Gottlieb. She married Eric Zornberg. Eric Zornberg was my classmate in high school at Northmount High School in Montreal, and then college mate at McGill. So I knew him quite well, and I'd met Aviva, and I read some of her work, and she's brilliant. And psychoanalytic thinking to bear. So just two random thoughts about Moses. There's so much to say about this, and one is that just maybe Moses was in cognitive decline and he mixed up what he heard. After all, the previous time he was told to hit it. And he said, well, am I supposed to hit it? Am I supposed to speak to it? What am I supposed to do? Anyway, so he does what he did before, namely hits it. The other thing is, in terms of the question you brought up right at the beginning, like how forgiving should God or we be towards Moses. I think we have to remember that Moses witnessed all of these miracles that God did, and he was the one, Moses, who saw God, not face to face, face to back, but something that should have, if in fact he did hear it correctly, should have carried it through to carry through God's command as it was stated, rather than, do the other thing, which then didn't honor God in the way God would have liked.
Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, this was our last class for the season. I always want to feel bereft of the Devarim Parshas, etc. But we'll have to. You'll keep watch the Parsha sheets, and I'll have enough to say about them during that. In the meantime, I wish everybody a beautiful summer, restful summer. I'm going to be studying a lot, preparing for next year as well. And I look forward to seeing you both online and in person as everything kind of lines up. We'll figure out, if we'll bring the class back in person. I mean, it's very convenient, obviously, to do it this way, and we enjoyed for so many reasons to do that. But it'd be great to be together as well. So, with no further ado, have a wonderful, wonderful summer, and see you next year.